Good afternoon, Pamla ma'am. Thanks for joining. Am I audible?
Yes, good afternoon. Thank
Okay.
you. I'm well. I'm well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So before starting the session, just 1 minute is left, but I would like to share a good news to all of you that Pamla Gopaul ma'am has joined as senior fellow of SAIARD. Yesterday she has associated with us, and it's a really great honor for us. And now it's at least at 3 p.m. So thanks for once again to all the resource persons, participants on behalf of South Asian Institute for Advanced Research and Development and our another co-organizer, Mr. Hitesh Vaidya, Honorable Director of National Institute of Urban Affairs, Ministry of Urban Housing Affairs of Government of India has also associated with us. So today's discussion, which we are actually going to start under the ages of Urban 20 and the G20 mission of government of Indian presidency. So that is the rethinking of urban financing model to refuel the urban economy. So as you know that the urban sector is one of the most vital factors, and particularly in case of financing sector, most of the cases urban areas, urban sectors are depends on some direct financing model. And though we know that on behalf of the different nature, dynamicity, and the physiographic conditions, the nature of urban areas are different. And on that perspective, the several factors is also varied. And in this respect, the financing model, the development model, the infrastructure growth, each and everything is very quite interrelated. And as we are very much thankful that right now Director Mr. Hitesh Vaidya also joined. He is one of the think tank and one of the Government of India's organization, that is the NIUA, and we are closely work together and as an associate partner, MOU partner of NIUA as well. So SAIARD has also focused from the very beginning with its community level development, how we can incorporate the model, the policies into the ground level realities, and through the application of the SLN technology and all that. And as well as our main focus is to connect the world, connect the intellectuals through that kind of different kinds of discussions, roundtables, as that through that discussions we will get some ideas, some inputs for the further development, and also what India is focusing, particularly in case of urban sector, whatever their think tanks are doing for the development of urban sectors, the world can also be able to get learned from them. So that is the this dialogue, this conference or conference, whatever I am saying, not any conference or roundtable is not just a conference, it's a confluence of ideas, confluence of gathering, and confluence of sharing of knowledge, ideas, and etc. So SAIARD, from the very beginning of its platform, in collaboration with NIV, we have conducted so many academic these kind of initiations for the development of thinking, for the development of policy matters, etc. So on behalf of SAIARD, I first humbly share my gratitude to Honorable Hitesh Vaidya sir for his association with NIUA, along with our Honorable today's guest, Mr. Sonobe sir, CEO of Asian Development Bank Institute, and Pamla Gopaul ma'am, Head Policy Bridge, AUDC and NEPAD from South Africa, and also my friend Dr. Nicolas from Paris Alliance, from Grand Paris Alliance from France. So hopefully Nicolas will join soon, but we will not let you our discussion no longer. I would like to request today's session to chair our Honorable Pamla ma'am, as well as she is now the Senior Fellow of SAIARD as well. So I'll request Pamla ma'am to continue today's session with this valuable point. Thank you. Over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Chowdhury. And hello, everyone. And thank you so much again for this wonderful opportunity to be an associate fellow to this very important intellectual platform. I am really honored and humbled to be a part of this team. And I welcome you all to this seminar today. I just wanted to make my intervention, or should we allow Professor Sonobe to make his intervention? I will serve as a capacity of chair today, and maybe we'll, for the interest of time, I'm aware that Professor Sonobe has other pressing commitments, so maybe I would just set the scene a little bit and share my perspective on the topic, and then I will invite Professor Sonobe and the rest of our panelists that we have today. So just to have an understanding from an African context, the adoption of the Agenda 2063 in January of 2015 at the African Union Assembly of Heads of State and Government made a clear testament that Africa's leaders was committed to building a united, peaceful, and sustainable, inclusive, and prosperous society in the decades that lie ahead of us. Now, Agenda 2063 is Africa's blueprint for socio-economic transformation, and this places urban planning at the center of the continental drive towards a cohesive society, where every citizen plays a role and benefits from the wealth generated by this transformation. In this vision, urban planning is seen as a catalyst for structural changes that will deliver stronger growth and generate quality jobs for all Africans, especially for women and youth. We understand that Africa's urban population is growing rapidly by 4.7% annually since the year 2000. And as a result of this rapid growth, cities are expanding into jurisdictions of neighboring local governments and are becoming increasingly fragmented. A number of local government jurisdictions create coordination gaps across local governments that make it difficult to establish coherent policies in urban areas. And between the years 2000 and 2016, despite the infringing global environmental crisis, Africa actually enjoyed a period of unprecedented economic performance with an average growth of about 4.6%. And this growth, however, has been limited economically without any acceleration of hope for economic diversification that could address the structural challenges of both poverty and inequality. So Africa has fallen short of a 7% growth rate anticipated by Agenda 2063 that could catalyze prosperity on the continent. But based on in its immense natural resources, diversification of economic activity and the shift from sustainable agriculture towards productive sectors such as transformed agriculture, manufacturing, and high quality services are expected to drive this transformation. African cities, however, outperform the rest of their countries in almost all the dimensions because the cities are more attractive because of job opportunities. And these jobs provide hourly wages in large cities that are more than twice as high as they are in rural areas. So while the percentage of employment is slightly lower in these cities than rural areas, unemployment is less prevalent as urban workers work for about 30% more hours a week than rural workers do. And of course, this brings in educational opportunities that are better in cities than are in rural areas. But of course, depending on the size of the city, the young city dwellers receive an average of about 2.5 to 4 years more education than young rural residents. And already today, we share the share of skills and jobs in cities are approximately 2.5 times more higher than in rural areas. So the local governments play a huge role in the implementation of their national economic development programs. And these in local, developing local government capacity is increasingly decentralizing both indispensable to accelerating and improving the quality of economic growth in Africa. To this effect, we know that Africa, economic futures lies in its cities, and therefore the national development strategies are important and create opportunities which has to be included in the national development plans, and urban economy should be at the center of these plans. And of course, these urbanization and the growth is happening at a very rapid state, and the expansion of data and information is critical. And therefore, as the African Union Development Agency, we are working with the Institute for Security Studies on a program called International Futures Forecasting System, where we work across the sectors, but we include as well governance, demographics, health, education, leapfrogging, and infrastructure manufacturing, because we want to combine these scenario-based impacts on long-term forecasting towards how we're fulfilling the goals and aspirations of the continental blueprint, which is Agenda 2063. So, with that, I just want to leave it as that, and then I can always add on as I invite our next speaker, Professor Sonobe, to contribute to this very, very important topic. So, Mr. Sonobe, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pamla. Thank you very much. And Biswajit, thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting. It's a great pleasure to participate in this gathering. My name is Tetsushi Sonobe. So are you seeing my name? Yeah, so I put Dean, but Dean could be a first name, but Dean is not a part of my name. So I'm just Dean of ADB Institute. ADB Institute is a Tokyo-based think tank of ADB Asian Development Bank, which is headquartered in Manila, Philippines. And yeah, so I have believed that in India, the demand for urbanization must be very high for many years. And then I happened to be invited to this meeting and then learned that the topic is Refuel Urban Economy. So I believe that the people gathering in this virtual space agree with me that the urbanization demand is high in India. But in my case, I believe that the demand for urbanization through high quality infrastructure investment is especially high in India. And then I guess other people also agree with me, but different people may think so for different reasons. So that's why I think it may be there may be some benefits if I talk about my reason why I think the high quality infrastructure investment and urbanization are very important in India. And then one of my reasons is the importance of increasing connectivity. And then recently I learned the G20 Sherpa, Mr. Amitabh Kant, shared the same view. I attended the 14th South Asia conference held by the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. That was held just the next day of the Bhopal retreat where I met Biswajit. Then the first speaker of the conference was Sherpa Kant. And then he began saying that G20 India really needs a very good strategy for boosting economy and boosting India economy. And then he said the strategy must be related to increase the connectivity. And the reason why is India's regional kind of integration is very limited. For example, the intra-regional trade account for only 5% of India's trade. Okay. But in ASEAN countries, in Southeast Asia, the intra-regional trade accounts for almost 25%. Okay. So then Sherpa Kant said that it is very important to increase intra-regional trade and also intra-regional tourism. And then I completely agree with him. The strengthening the kind of intra-regional integration will be very important to strengthen the Indian economy and India's geopolitical position. Okay. And then the increasing intra-regional kind of integration means increasing connectivity because those inter-regional trade and regional tourism are very much related to or actually happening in the urbanized areas, right? So, and then the connectivity of urbanized area, very important. So that's one. And then if for trade, intra-regional trade to be increased, there must be more production, more industrial development. Okay. And more industrial development requires the more labor, more people to live in the urbanized area. Now we are moving to the second problem, which is related to the last mile problem. Okay, if those cities or industrial areas are not very much livable, then it's very difficult to attract the large number of the people who would work for the industrial development. So this chronic problem of last mile problem must be addressed. Okay. For that purpose, high quality infrastructure investment is needed. And then how about the intra-regional tourism? The tourists come to cities, and then what they find is the very bad quality of air. So this must be addressed. Otherwise, the tourism will not increase in India. So, and to address the problem of low quality of air, there must be a lot of high quality infrastructure investment. And the fourth issue is, fourth reason is related to climate change resilience. Okay, so in Asia, so everywhere, almost everywhere in Asia, climate change impacts are essentially water story, like rising sea levels. Okay, so my country, Japan, is surrounded by sea. So Japan is, in a sense, very risky. But unlike Vietnam or small island developing states, Japan has very high mountains in the central part, so not so vulnerable. But how about India? India is not completely surrounded by the sea, but the southern part is surrounded by sea, and the northern part has a problem or risk of glacial lake outburst flood. Okay, so those people living along rivers as well as along the sea coast are vulnerable, and then they will need to move to somewhere a little more inland, forming new cities. Okay, so again, this is urbanization, and then again, the livable cities must be developed. And then the problem is, as the title of today's gathering indicate, finance, how to finance urbanization. Here is one solution. Please look at the chat box. I just sent a link to one blog written by my ADBI colleagues. Title is Land Value Capture Mechanism. That is a solution. Provides opportunity for sustainable urbanization in developing Asia. So this method allows budget gaps to be filled. In budget gaps in infrastructure project can be filled while promoting the development. So this is essentially the application of what the urban economist call Henry George theorem. Okay. But I have no time to explain in detail about this solution, but please, because this is just a blog, so you can read it very quickly. So please check this ADBI blog. And then this is just one solution. Actually, a lot of money is needed to increase high quality infrastructure investments for urbanization. And also not only finance, but also technology and human resource development are needed about this, so G7, especially Japan and the Asian Development Bank, are very much willing to support. ADB is really willing to lend money to India, but India has a strong economy and saying, oh, no, 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 we don't need. But now, please think about very high demand for high quality infrastructure investment for urbanization in your country. And then, as you know, the ADB's India resident mission, especially the country director, Mr. Konish, and his team, really working hard to support G20 India, as well as the infrastructure development in India. So please consider that kind of options. Thank you very much. So I stop here, and I'm very happy to accept any questions.
Harigato gozaimasu, Sonobe-san. We highly appreciate your inputs. We've heard you clearly emphasize the high quality of infrastructure is important for India's economic development. We've heard the impact of regional integration is, although currently limited in India, I know Asian countries, through their best practices, experiences, and the support of the Asian Development Bank can support India to get to the levels of that of the Asian countries. You also touched on the importance of interregional tourism, my apologies. And of course, that will most certainly strengthen India's economic and geopolitical environment, as well as the issues on climate change resilience and the impacts of sea levels. So we're very, very grateful for your comments and Japan's support in this process and work with India, all towards improved development and economic growth for our country. So thank you very much for your input. I would like now to please call Mr. Hitesh Vaidya, who's the Director National for the National Institute of the Urban Affairs. And Mr. Hitesh has over 20 years of experience in the field of urban management. So, sir, over to you. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon and greetings from India. Everybody joining. I can see my...
Hear you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, and I'm really thank you for giving me an opportunity. Thank you for organizing this event. I'm seeing my Mr. Sonobe and my great friend Nicolas. Congratulations for organizing, and thank you again on behalf of NIU, also adding to this request of Mr. Biswajit for joining this workshop. Idea is,
I'm not sure
I always
if anybody
believe
is having a problem, but I cannot hear anything from my end.
But I was told that everybody is able to listen.
We can hear you.
Is it?
Can hear you.
It's audible.
Yeah.
I can.
Okay. Okay. Great. Thanks.
Pamla, can you join once again? I think that will be network issues. Please leave and join once again.
Great.
Okay. Fine. Yes, sir. Please continue.
Yeah, sorry. Organizing this workshop is not just to do a workshop, but I think it's also to bring different minds together when we are talking about a transformed urban discourse within the overall globe. India is really, really excited that it is picking up the presidency of G20, and as a National Institute of Urban Affairs, we are the technical secretariat for Urban 20. And while we say that it is a technical secretariat, the idea is the city leaders, and what we want is Urban 20 is the voices of cities, and it is what cities require to really meet those global aspirations, global agendas, and the commitments which has been done by the national leaders, how we prepare cities to really achieve those global commitments and global aspirations. And I think that's the discussions which we are having. And I see a topic today is how do you prepare and improve the finances of cities? Yesterday, our honorable finance minister presented India's budget for the next year. And among lot of things, four things which were really brought out from the direction to the overall growth of the country, as well as I think focus on the urban issues, is how do we reach last mile connectivity, which I think Sonobe has already talked about. It talked about how do we push the country towards the green growth. It talks about more focus on investment and on infrastructure investments. And lastly, how do we really get, while we are talking about financing some of these issues, how do we really bring inclusion into the picture? While we all know the budgets are talk about the financing situations, but I think financing means much more than the capital expenditure. While we are talking about financing, it's a larger issue which we need to really look at it. And if these aspirations, which our honorable finance minister also talked about, then the challenge is how do we really prepare our cities for this to achieve these aspirations. And I think there are much more knowledgeable people on the platform, and they will discourse. But my limited experience working with things is we need to really start talking granularity, into the whole discourse. And the first questions and some of the questions we need to ask: what do cities need to finance? What is that we really require to finance? How much is needed? The gaps which we have to really look at. What are the components of finances which we need to really work on when we talk about making a municipal finance functional? And what are the instruments available on the table? Which cities? Sonobe talked about VCF, but there are other financial instruments which can be looked at, municipal bond. But right now the challenge, and I take this opportunity when Mr. Sonobe from ADBI is here, the taxonomy of all the bilaterals, multilaterals, banks is totally different for things. When we talk, how do you bring, if you want cities to be prepared for the climate finance, climate challenges, how do you get that language of finance, which is the language of cities? Because the type of taxonomy or standardization of taxonomy which we need to bring, where cities can access these different financial instruments, these financial pots, and make them excited, has to be that language which they need to really, really need to work out. Because such a big, and second thing which is coming up, are our cities really has a capacities to really access these pots of money? And so the skill sets, the knowledge, role they need to play is very, very important. We all talk about a municipal bond or green bond or VCF. I think these are products, and I think products cannot be scalable. What can be scalable is the processes. And if processes can be streamlined and they are given to people, every city can contextualize its own basis, but it knows that this is the minimum viable process which I need to do to access this pot of money. And that is where I think the challenge for all of us is, how do you really get the processes right, processes standards, so that different cities can access and improve the financial situations within themselves. I think, again, a lot, Madam Pamla as well as Sonobe Sahab talk about the financial situation of urban local bodies, and I don't want to get into it, but if we have to start rethinking, and which is the topic of today's, then the major thing is, which I was talking about, we need to really, how do you financially strengthen this urban local bodies? I think that is the question which all of us has to do. Right now cities are not even looking at capital investment planning. Forget about it. How do you prepare them? Because when they do a capital investment plan, I'm working with a master plan of Delhi 2041. We have a great aspiration how Delhi will look like 2041, but unfortunately, the whole master plan does not have a financing chapter. So if our planning has to be get into this, and if legal instrument which really gives the direction of 20 years and financing is not the part of that chapter, then what are we talking about? Intentions, how do you convert intentions to actions? Unless intentions to action has to be done, then we need to be very, very seriously go back to the drawing table and make those costing of what we are talking about, prioritizing what we are talking about, phasing of what we are talking about, and then taking those decisions which we can be implemented. I think second thing which I think is a challenge which all of us has to really look at it. Are there projects, investable projects on the table? And how do you support cities to really make these projects more investable? How do you mobilize funds on a timely basis? How do you improve the credit enhancement supports? What type of reforms are required, whether it's a legislative reforms or operational reforms or a management reforms? And also, as I told you, all of this requires, and that's why I come from, I'm coming from National Institute of Urban Affairs, where the focus is how do you build capacities? How do you bring expertise on the table? How do you bring those skill sets which requires to be really improved or reformed if we want to really take this the new thinking forward. And I very distinctly, when I was a part of USAID fire project, which was one of the longest urban project which happened in India. While we say fire project, its full form was Financial Institutions Reform and Expansion Project. And even though I still say I have a fire in my heart still burning for the urban sector, but the project acronym was FIRE, not the fire in my heart. But the biggest lesson we learned during that project was, while we talk about municipal bond, that's an outcome. But if you have to have a municipal bond, so you need to go back to the step back and say, does cities have accounting systems in place? Do they have a proper budgeting in place? Do we have an investable project in place? And that requires a long hand-holding support, which we need to give it. It's not just a talk. We need to really work with the cities. We need to soil our hands to work them, understand, unfortunately, and even though we say alternative sources of financing within India, there are total 1996 was the first municipal bond. Today we are 23 years old. We have only 15 to 16 municipal bonds. Why this municipal bond market is not taking place? What are the challenges? We also did a value capture financing study in 100 cities. I'm right now looking at those reports. I will say, it does not give a very optimistic picture whether cities can really access that fund. So I think while we are looking at all of us at a supply side, I think the time has come to start looking at a demand side of challenges. And unless we look at a demand side of something, we can go on pouring supply side of instruments which require. So we need to look at accounting reforms once again, bring the financial management practices. How do we improve the own source revenues of the cities? What are those areas where they can bid? How do you make them excited? And also, how do you go make and handhold cities to leverage alternative source of financing? I think these are questions while we are rethinking. I leave it to the experts like Sonobe, Pamla, bringing the global practices which India can look at. These are the best practices where that can be shared, and we can prepare our cities to accept those or work on those practices. I think with U20 and first inception of workshop happening in Ahmedabad on Urban 20, the whole idea is the mayors of the cities we come up are coming, and finance is going to be a, we all talk about net zero 2070 or a climate issues and all, but unless we prepare cities, the action which has to happen at a city level, we all will be having one, we are right now 16, 20, maybe 7th U20, we may be taking a different and talking the same things. But I think use this opportunity because the challenge for us is not for today, but the future which we will be leaving behind to the next generation. And if we can streamline our financial situation, I think 80% of our problems can actually be solved if we really start working on linking a planning with the budgeting and financing together. So with that, I stop here. And I more than answering some of questions, I myself have a lot of questions. So I look forward, Sonobe, Pamela ji, and Nicolas bringing those global practices to bring on board so we can learn. And I always believe this platform is on aggregation of mind. We may not have succeeded in segregation of waste, but let's succeed in aggregation of mind, and look forward to a lot of great ideas during this workshop. Again, on behalf of NIUA, I welcome all of you to this platform and look forward to learning the rethinking or reimagining the cities with the lens of finance. Thank you.
Ma'am, please unmute yourself. Please.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Hitesh, sir. That is a very, very passionate and clear statement, especially heartwarming to know of India's contribution to its budget to include connectivity, the green growth and infrastructure investments. To think about it, currently Africa's subnational governments rely on a lot of these state transfers and grants to fund at least 58% of their budget. So these, transfers have several potential advantages, and the building capacity that you mentioned, and how we can expand finance into the cities, which will actually contribute to the growth of our economies as we move forward, is critical in the statements that you made. So thank you very, very much for your contribution. I would now like to call upon Mr. Nicolas Buchoud. I hope I'm pronouncing that well. Sir, thank you. You are serving as an advisor to the Dean of the Asian Development Bank Institute. And thank you for joining us today as you bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise in the areas of supporting Japan, especially now in the T7 process, as Japan holds the presidency for the G7 group. So over to you, sir, and thank you for your time afforded to us today.
Thank you very much, Pamela. I hope my sound is okay. I have prepared a couple of slides, but in order to avoid any technical mismatch, I will start without the slides and then show them if it would work. Thank you very much, Dr. Chowdhury, for setting up this discussion and for being very efficient, because I think the first time we met was in Gopaul less than a month ago, right, at the occasion of the T20 special event. And somehow this is for me a good illustration of the high potential of the G20 India to contribute redesigning the global urban agenda. To be complete and not just to name a number of my duties or titles, I was privileged to be invited by Hitesh Vaidya to become a special advisor for the Urban 20 India. And I'm also co-chairing the T20 India task force on life, ethics and values and infrastructure investments. And Dean Sonobe could have also probably mentioned he's co-chairing T20 India task force on macroeconomic transformation. I am mentioning this triple duty in the T7, in the T20, and in the Urban 20 to say that if I fail this year to push a number of strong arguments regarding supporting a new way to envision sustainable urban development and finance, then probably either it is me who is hopeless, or it is the situation who is even more complicated, because what we can see in my understanding, and having been working also in local and regional government in France, and I would say that with the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak, we have witnessed the end of 30 years, but especially a long decade after the global financial crisis of 2008, of a little bit of a unilateral way to think about urban development, and especially to envision urban development finance. I would very much support Hitesh when he says that, for example, municipal bonds and other things like this, they are products, and they should not be confused with policy processes. We collectively have been functioning out of not the right knowledge being shared. Let me just explain that very important point. At the turn of the millennium, when there was this common discovery that the planet was becoming more urbanized than rural, right? This shift initially was a bit overlooked by many governments. But suddenly, 2006, 7, 8, it became more obvious. For instance, in the European Union, Germany took the lead in issuing in 2007 the Leipzig Charter on Sustainable Urban Cities. And we needed, it was such a historic turn, especially for development cooperation, that we needed to establish a lot of work. Cities needed to talk to other cities, urbanists to other urbanists, and one value was to try to first understand what does this shift towards urbanization as a general pattern of development of the economy would mean. What what would be the impacts on urban design, urban forms, urban planning? What are the linkages between what is being carried out in terms of projects or norms or regulations or bylaws or investments in a given location, and how much that contributes to regional or interregional or global connectivity? Those factors were so new that building networks and working throughout networks looked very important. Hence, the formation, for example, of United Cities and local governments. I will not go into the history of the movement, but it was incorporated largely at that time. The C40 was initiated in the late 90s, and there was a blend of fascination and acceleration also of transformations, and sociology supported the notion of global cities, etc. But when you look back after 20, 30 years of those movements, those networks have been efficient, but they have not been really efficient in building up new knowledge. And they have been efficient in connecting, but creating a network does not mean that you are creating new knowledge, and that new knowledge is being shared. Hence, there was a kind of laziness internationally, in the belief that everything should be about more growth through more connectivity, through more global cities, through more global integration, with a kind of model based upon planning and zoning, somehow largely influenced by not planning from the US, but financial tools from the kind of regulations like in the United States and also in a number of liberal countries. And we have completely overlooked other sets of solutions. In the past decade, whereby the issue of technological transformation, smart cities, digitalization have been getting higher on the agendas, even though smart cities issues do not date back just in the past decade, but can be traced a little bit earlier on. What we have seen, and there are interesting studies showing that the number of contributions, academic contributions or research papers about smart cities, they were there in starting somehow in the mid-90s, then started to grow a little bit at the turn of the millennium, and by 2006, 2007, suddenly there was a growth, and then it has become exponential. But the problem is that somehow there has been a movement to consider that the startup economy, the economy of innovation, was a very strong rationale to apply to urban systems, because technology would be the way to solve most of the issues, except that, and this is probably also related to this model of networks and cooperation through networks, most of, or a large portion of international cooperation, either through bilateral cooperation or bilateral finance or even multilateral finance, including foundations, including multinational companies, etc., has largely become a model of pilot projects to be scaled up with a horizon 25, 30, blah, blah, etc. Largely derived from these investment schemes of the startup economy. In one sense, this is very good because this is a very dynamic system. It impulses strong movement. On the other hand, this is completely wrong because a city or an urban system cannot be managed, planned, or projected in the future just upon this model of projects, local projects that to be scaled up, etc. And interestingly, and we can see that in many different regions of the world, so this is part of how global capitalism has grown, the real estate industry has become very, very strong, globally integrated also through funds and investors' funds and sources of investments. And the real estate industry has loved to embrace this paradigm of projects and to be scaled up and starting local and then developing them, etc. And again, this is good because in many cases you need private investors. I'm not saying this is not useful or necessary, but the problem is that years after years, we have also witnessed a decline that has been very well documented, even in the European Union when we have strong welfare system, a decline in public investments, a decline in investments in public infrastructure, social infrastructure, a decline in the investment in a number of public services. Similarly, when the framework of the SDGs was issued and formalized in 2014, then 2015 officially, then practically since this framework of the SDGs, including how to finance the different goals and targets,
I am just trying to find out if there's a connectivity issue because I think Mr. Nicolas has frozen. Is anyone experiencing the same problem?
No, it's okay from our side. I think
Okay, thank you. I
Nicolas
can hear
will
you.
join once again, I think.
Okay.
I'm sorry, the system is a bit unstable, so I will shut down my camera.
Great, thank you. That's good.
I was saying that the issue of the finance gaps of the SDGs has become quasi-consubstantial of the SDGs system. And this is a bit schizophrenic as an overall way to envision the production of urbanization globally, because on the one hand, on the system approach, and I'm simplifying maybe a little bit too much, but on the one hand, on the system approach, we can see that the gaps to achieve shared collective goals are becoming so huge that they are not just gaps, they are just an impossibility to deliver. And on the other hand, the model, the typical model of urban production through this system of projects and project by projects and to be scaled up is interesting, is delivering in many ways, but is not delivering a sufficient system change. And we can also witness that because in many cases we are unable to build cities or to invest into low carbon trajectories that are at scale with the goals such as for the Paris Agreement. And recently, last year, there was the Montreal Kunming Agreement on biodiversity. When you look at the real scale of policies and strategies to preserve or to upscale biodiversity in urban systems, again, there is this discrepancy between more difficult abilities to shape strong policy trajectories and dispersed projects. So how to overcome that is really a very, very important issue. And one way, for me, it's not the only way, but I think one way to overcome this problem or to reconcile both the ability of the private sector to be a strong catalyst and the need to have strong public policies is to be very good at the production of infrastructure systems. So in this was exposed very well by Dean Sonobe through the lens of quality infrastructure. But we can see more precisely, for example, this year during the G20 India, and I will stop here, that the main or one of the main pillars of the G20 finance track infrastructure working group is precisely how to deliver on sustainable urbanization at large scale. And it's quite interesting because in the past 2-3 years, we have been collectively with the think tanks which were heading the T20, but also with ministerial counterparts and with other engagement groups, such as the business engagement groups or the long-term investors, that basically a group of sovereign wealth funds, to strongly advocate for the issue of urban development to become a macroeconomic issue at G20 level, so as to avoid this scattered landscape of initiatives that are always many times interesting, but do not match the need for overall transformation. So this year we have a strong T20, and we have urbanization, which is very, I would say, officially positioned as a matter of common interest in the finance track, which is literally the core of the machine, of the G20 machine, and India as such, right, with at this moment less than 40% of the people who are living in an urban context, is also facing a huge challenge of how to move forward. So the host country is directly concerned at in its very intimate organization about this question. But I would like to finish by saying that what Dean Sonobe mentioned about this very specific situation of India, which is both a continent and a world in itself, and now the most populated country, but also one that has strikingly low level of trade and other kinds of exchanges at the regional level in South Asia or with Southeast Asia, means that if we want that the G20 India makes a difference, of course, it needs to address Indian conditions of urban growth and urban development, and find ways to push for global solutions to be efficient in India. But this probably also has to go with another challenge, is about how then the development of major second-tier, third-tier cities, let's say the whole urban system or the urban mesh of India in the future, can also contribute to an economy that is not just inward-looking, but that is also somehow getting more integrated in a number of trade routes or supply chains, either internationally or regionally, right? So this would be a short description of the landscape of urban investment issues and some strong challenges at the global level, and a great opportunity during the G20 India, probably unprecedented. And I'm very happy that you took the initiative to have this conversation, but also the challenges that India is facing as a leader of this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nicolas, for your very, very, in-depth and detailed, knowledge from your expertise in this area of urban development. I like the fact that you alluded to the COVID, because I think the COVID circumstances have showed us the status of revenues and expenditure, how they have deteriorated, since March 2020, where local governments and cities had to be at the forefront of government to respond economically to the COVID crisis. And, this caused increased pressure on local and public services. It created sort of weak economic performance that has led to a general impoverishment of local finances. So the local governments, I think, have seen lost up to about 60% of their revenue during the year 2021. So ultimately, these expenditures we've seen being directed to reinforcing healthcare facilities, which has not been factored into the long-term investment projects and planning of these cities. So they had to, have a substantial drop in their budgets. And I think as we move forward to this decentralizing policies, have given cities and rural areas a greater role to play in social economic development. So the new urban agenda, can make a commitment to strengthen this urban government and broaden the inclusive platforms that we need to align with the national policies, taking into account, targeted policies, understanding that different cities take on different planning focus. So I think your comment about policies, being recognized at subnational level, at local levels, so that it can meet local financial, development for public policies. I think your comments were quite critical in that avenue. There is a question from the floor, and the question is, in the current investment-driven urban economy, which is the sustainable financial model. So it's a question. In the current investment-driven urban economy, which is the sustainable financial model? So I think that's yes. I see a hand raised, Pava.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Purva Sharma. I'm working at WRI at the city's research team. So, my question to the panel is that today, when I understand the importance of new urban agenda and SDGs because India is one of the signatories and we have to achieve it by 2030. But currently, if we see the pattern of urbanization that is emerging in India, we are seeing a kind of cluster development which is coming up. At the one hand, we have small and medium towns which are coming up. Our metropolitan cities currently at 53 and has been projected to reach by 60, 65 in the upcoming census. Also, at the same time, we are seeing a corridor development that is coming along the transportation corridors or the railway areas. So we are seeing a different type of urbanization scenario that is coming upon India's urban landscape, which is not only induced by population growth, but it is being induced by the economic growth. So my question is that what kind of how we can develop the indicators where we can calculate a kind of consistent or develop a kind of consistent indicators to measure this urban growth, because urban growth is no longer restricted only to the population, but now it includes area, it includes contribution of the industrial sector, and also these transportation corridors which are coming up. Secondly, there is a strong relationship between industrial development and urbanization in India, which was studied long time ago, but with the coming of MDGs and SDGs, I think that relationship has weakened. And at present, if we again look into the economic growth, a strong relationship is coming between industrial development and urbanization. What kind of indicators we need to look into that? And finally, the contribution of ecological, environmental emissions, or what kind of externalities it has now created in urban areas. What kind of urgent measures we need to now adopt? So these are my three questions. One is the transportation induced urban development, relationship between industrial development and urban development, and lastly, the impact of these environmental hazards on urban areas. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your interesting question. Very, very important as well. Nicolas, I think you were going to answer before Javier took the floor.
Yes, I hope my signal would be stable, but thank you, Pova, for raising such nice and overall questions. It's very difficult to answer comprehensively, but let me give you three hints. The first one, you're perfectly right. Especially in the Indian context of today, the form of urban development through mega corridors, right, is one important form and one major form of urbanization. And this is one major driver for investments, I would say, that are being driven at federal level and that are the one connected also to a number of multilateral sources of investment. And this is very critical because if in that context, issues, for example, of inequalities are not being addressed, then the efforts or the burden on just local stakeholders will be so high that they will not be able to answer probably to them fully. So I would say, to simplify, the investment strategies in future infrastructure systems probably are the place where balanced and inclusive or equal or just urban systems will be fabricated or not. And I'm saying this also because given the growing importance of private sector money, especially through the real estate industries and developers, to build housing complexes and so on, where this issue is rather secondary. Infrastructure investments is probably, for governments, one of the rare opportunity to actually instrument more equal forms of urban development. So that is one aspect. Regarding the third point which you raised, there is more and more literature about
I think we have a connectivity problem again.
Yes,
Nicolas,
yes.
maybe
Yeah.
you can switch off your camera.
Sure.
Nicolas, if you can maybe switch off your camera, because you have frozen again. Your network is not strong.
I think, ma'am, we may go for the first question to Sonobe sir or Hitesh sir.
Precisely. And that question again,
From,
if yes, it's about sustainable financing.
yeah.
Mr. Sonobe-san, would you like to intervene on that question?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, my side it's also very unstable.
Yeah. So basically on that sustainability, more and more local governments, I think, need to find new avenues of sources for funding. And, local governments normally have very low fiscal resources. And I think the share of own source revenues in their budgets is currently very small, and transfers from, other levels of governments are limited and often very unstable. So I think more and more it's becoming overwhelming, and majority of the local governments lack access to credit for financing investment. So the more, the national governments are speaking to local governments, and the more that there's an exchange of the need on the ground, and the more inclusive national and subnational and local budget processes become, I think the more sustainable it will be, as well as if we try to align our policies of that of national as well as subnational environment. I think the sustainability then can build its momentum on how the impacts of what is made, what policies are made at national level impacts the local level. So I just feel that on a overarching approach as to everything that we were saying, these layers in the economy need to speak to one another, and the policies need to be coherent with one another. Nicolas, I'm not sure if you're back and if you can hear us now. Maybe
Yes,
we
yes.
give you an opportunity to finish your statement. Thank you.
But yes, no, I thank you very much. I was just mentioning that there is a growing number of very, very interesting, I would say, documentation regarding the issue of biodiversity and natural systems, or the green and the blue economy, and that again. That has to be done at many different scales, all at the same time. The resources allocated to that part is very often the lowest segment in municipal or in budgets at different scales: municipal, neighborhood, community, metropolitan, or mega regional scale. But it is so important, and there need to be much more investigation, but also much more translation from, I would say, science, and I would say voluntary or activism to translate that into common action. Probably it is a bit more easy to implement than CO2 issues, which are sometimes a little bit abstract or so much embedded into existing ways to live and to do economic practice, that they are a little bit more difficult maybe to be seen by citizens. So this question of the natural-based solutions, I'm quite happy that in the discussions in this future, or the new convention on biodiversity, this is not absent, and that there is growing awareness about the economics of natural-based solutions. But in India, it will be so critically important. You can see in so many different cities new developments which are planned and which are nice and which have everything, but just to it, because it's a different part of the local zoning, there will be nothing, right? And the existing, so for example, wetlands, etc., will be completely spoiled. So this is a very, very important point to move beyond zoning for such issues. And I think I will stop here. There was a second point that Purva you mentioned, but I will stop here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And just to add to that, during COVID, we saw the transport sector, the vital role it played in producing, transporting the goods, etc. I think a multi-sectorial approach in urban development is critical in terms of building our cities. In Africa, we have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which you asked about industrialization and urban cities. I think this is absolutely fundamental. The increase in our trade with inter-regional cities are critical. I think processing of agricultural goods as final products are critical. Ultimately, we need to see an increase in our exports and a decrease in our imports. And that's also demonstrated in the Russia-Ukraine war, where we saw our independence on wheat, for example. So these are some of the, areas that we were confronted with, which we could learn from and work towards uniting it in a multi-sectorial approach. So with that, I don't see any other questions. If anybody would like to raise their hand, if there's something that they would like to contribute or utilize the expertise that we have on this platform, you are most welcome to raise your hand. We have a few minutes. Yes, over to you, Sonobe-san.
Yeah. So multi-sector approach related to the transportation infrastructure. Yeah, but the possibility of bringing the private capital is high compared with others. So that's a kind of hope. Yeah. So, but because of basically the India economy is growing faster than any other, countries or regions. So and then the cities, although not central, but big cities are there, and the city. So the demand for transportation is high, and then along the highway or railroad, the developers can bring lots of amenities and the industrial zones and those things, and then they will develop and then also internalize the external economies emanating from each amenities, industrial parks, and also residential areas as developers. So that kind of private sector investment is kind of mainstream during the high economic growth era in Japan. So, and of course, there is difference between the high growth era in Japan in the past and today's India's high growth era. The difference is the need to regulate, also need to pay much attention to environment and green gas emissions, but with kind of strong regulatory framework, and then it may be just matter of unleash the dynamism of private sector.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think also what's very important regarding, involving of private sector, the way we package also our business plan to them. Private sector is led by profit and sustainable financing, the way it's packaged, the way governments and the national development plans incorporate a conducive environment is really important for their buy-in. Yes, Purva, you have a question?
No, I just want to add one point, Ms. Pamla, because private sector has been involved with the urban local bodies in India, but that trend was restricted only up to the municipal corporations or to the metro cities. But now, as the recent budget has highlighted, there is a need to upscale it now to the lower tier level cities as well. Because as we have been doing our research, it's been a decade that the first India infrastructure report was published in the year 2011. After that, we had National Urban Planning framing policy paper. But all these papers, they have been advocating and recommending regarding the involvement of private sector, but that has till date was not implemented. But at least with the coming up of this budget, at least it's now being realized that the importance of private sector is there in increasing the infrastructure services in India. That's the only
Yes,
point
yes.
I wanted to add. Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you very much. I think more and more private sector involvement is realized across globally. And I think it's important that governments are realizing their inclusivity is fundamental to the economy's growth. Also for job creation, for building capacity among our
Most
skilled
important.
laborers.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think, it's platforms like these that can contribute to bringing awareness to our governments, our local governments at national and regional level as well. So thank you very much for that contribution. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to hand over now to Professor Chowdhury. But before I leave, I just want to indicate it was an absolute pleasure to chair the session, and I look forward to more interesting engagements, more interesting topics. I learned certainly a lot from this discussion today, so I just want to thank you all, and I wish you well as we strive towards our urban cities and its development. So thank you very much.
Well, Pamla, it is really a nice and brainstorming session, and I really mesmerized as well as I was locked down when I heard all about voice and all about presentations, and particularly Sonobe sir, Nicolas, you and Hitesh sir, you are really a rock. So it's really a wonderful presentation, and I just several points we have already came out from our discussions. I just would like to mention 3 points which I have thought can be added or included with our discussions, and before it concluding. First of all, the increasing to generate the urban finance in a separate way, and means as the main focus. From the very beginning I mentioned, even in the G20 meeting I had already mentioned, the most of the cities are focused in the direct financing system, that is the either central government or state government or the World Bank, IMF, the ADB, like that organizations. So I must focus on the develop of the own resources which we have already. That is the mobilization of the local resources. So on the basis of the mobilization of local resources, we can sort out some more problems. We can also solve some more problems. Along with that, we can also generate some fund as well. I would like to give one example. Suppose solid waste is one of the major problem in each and every cities. And in that case, if we utilize the solid waste in a separate manner, and also we can use the solid waste part, that is the which ultimately become a fertilizer, biofertilizer can be, and we can utilize in the urban farming system. Through that urban farming system, we can also generate the farming system within the urban areas. We can also solve solid waste management problems as well. Secondly, we can also generate some employment opportunities among through this urban farming by creating several urban entrepreneurs. So developing the capacity as well as utilizing the local available resources, and thirdly creating urban entrepreneurship, which will ultimately can be solved not a larger percentage but in a minimum percentage, 20 to 25% can be solved, the different urban related issues, even the funding support as well. So these are the model, and hopefully the points which everybody has raised, that is the private sector association, capacity building, development, etc., etc. It's really hopeful through this discussion, our participants and this session will also be circulated through our social media platform, and those who will not be able to join, they can be able to listen the whole discussions in future as well. And in that perspective, I think definitely it will be a model which we have to think in a way. And there are several aspects are related to the urban sector, not only finance, and finance is also related with the several aspects, like is the, as Sonobe sir has mentioned, that is the climate fund and other funds, carbon trading. These are several funding options can be, model can be generated. But yes, of course, within 1.5 year, a half hour, it would not be possible to encase all. But definitely through this discussion, we have gained some points which ultimately helpful for the each and every urban stakeholders, through which they can think in a different way, and on the basis of that they can act in a different way. And with this aspect, with these expectations, I heartily thanks to all of you once again. I heartily thanks to our participants as well as our team, those who have organized the whole, manage this whole program for today's session. Hope very soon we will see when we will gather in another event, another brainstorming session to discuss in another parts of points which will not still now highlighted or can be highlighted in a more significant way. So with this, once again, on behalf of SAIARD, I thanks to all of you for associate, and thanks Sonobe sir, thanks Nicolas and Pamla ma'am and Hitesh sir. You have to leave due to some network issues. So once again, I thanks. Namaskar. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Right.
Thank you. Bye bye.
This is boarding. You can call him.
Thank you very much.